All right, guys. So Trump has been in office for just over 2 months now, and he's somehow already managing to implode the U.S. economy as he's doubling and tripling down on his plan to do sweeping tariffs against the top U.S. trading partners of Mexico, Canada, and China. The tariffs against Mexico and Canada are supposedly 25% each, and then the ones against China are going up from 10% to 20%. And this is already having disastrous consequences. So here, just to start us out, I'm going to break down the entire story of what's going on here. The headline from the AP is that just over the last couple of days, the Dow Jones has dropped nearly 650 points on worries that Trump's latest tariffs will slow the economy more. So they say U.S. stocks tumbled on Monday and wiped out even more of their gains since President Donald Trump's election in November, after he said that tariffs announced earlier on Canada and Mexico would take effect within hours. The S&P 500 dropped 1.8% after Trump said there was, quote, no room left for negotiations that could lower the tariffs set to begin on Tuesday, so today, for imports from Canada and Mexico. And they say Trump had already delayed the tariffs once before to allow more time for talks. So we're already getting an economic implosion that, according to multiple sources here, has basically completely erased the stock market gains since Trump won the November election. All of that gone, wiping out $3.4 trillion in value. You can literally see it happening here live on Fox News as they were covering him making this announcement. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, the Dow Watch is heavily in the red, plunging down there as he speaks. And then you also have at the same time the Atlanta Fed. They're now coming out and saying that they're forecasting the U.S. economy to plunge negative 2.8% in the first quarter, and they're warning of an outright recession in the United States. And this is obviously a big deal because this is a direct implication of Trump's policies. This is not what they were forecasting a few months ago for what this quarter was going to look like. This is a result of what Trump has been doing in the meantime. Now, to return to this no room left, why is Trump actually doing this? Well, remember, I think it was about a month ago, he was threatening to do similar tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and the justification that he used was that they are allowing or they are facilitating the flow of fentanyl into the United States. And so basically his legal justification to be able to do these tariffs unilaterally as the president was the fentanyl crisis is a national security issue, and these countries are helping to facilitate that issue. So I'm going to use my presidential authority in order to impose these tariffs to pressure them to do more to stop the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. Now, again, that's kind of just like the legal justification that he was making to be able to do the tariffs. And he's kind of undercut that since then, is now saying that this is more of a punishment against these countries for stealing American jobs. But that argument at face value didn't make sense when you come to realize that the amount of fentanyl that's coming to the United States from Canada, for example, one of the two countries that he's imposing these tariffs on under this justification, account for less than 1% of the fentanyl that comes into the U.S. So in response to Trump doing that about a month ago, you had Mexico come out and they said, okay, we're going to put a little bit more troops on the U.S.-Mexico border, right? Sort of handing a fig leaf to Donald Trump. You had Justin Trudeau in Canada came out and said, okay, we're adding this new border czar position. Most of the things that they promised to Trump in terms of addressing the fentanyl crisis were basically, again, just like fig leaves that didn't really mean anything. And most of it was stuff they were already planning on doing. So Trump then said, okay, I'll pause the tariffs for a little bit, see what kind of a deal we can work out, and maybe we don't have to do them. And then now he's coming out and he's saying, I guess you didn't do enough, and we're going to push forward with him. There's no room left to negotiate. This is happening one way or another, regardless of what you guys do in response. Now, again, I mean, the justification that this was actually about fentanyl was kind of bullshit from the beginning. This is kind of just Trump's economic policy. And keep in mind, he doesn't really understand how tariffs work. Like, that's kind of an important fact in this conversation, which is that Trump still to this day denies the fact that the way tariffs work is you are charging U.S. companies who are importing goods from abroad. It's not the foreign country that's paying for the tariff. It's a U.S. company that's importing from that foreign country, right? And so then those U.S. countries who are doing the importing are then going to pass those costs on to consumers. Trump just straight up doesn't believe that that's how tariffs work, even though that is how fucking tariffs work. So that's kind of an important part of this. Now, in terms of how this is going to impact prices here in the U.S., we have this rundown from CBS News, just the baseline products that are going to be the biggest hit. So here we have vegetables, fruit, beef, beer, and spirits. It's basically grocery prices. They say the U.S. imported more than $45 billion worth of agricultural products from Mexico in 2023. Almost 3/4 of such imports consisted of vegetables, fruit, beer, tequila, and other drinks and spirits, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. At the same time, the U.S. imported roughly $40 billion worth of Canadian agricultural products, mostly beef, pork, grains, potatoes, canola oil, etc. Another thing that's going to be hit harder, other than grocery prices, is electronics. They say that the tariffs are likely to drive up prices on a range of consumer goods, including laptops and tablets, video game consoles, and smartphones, according to an analysis from the Consumer Technology Association. We also have cars. So vehicles are expected to be hit hard by the tariffs, given their complex supply chains, which can involve car parts crossing borders multiple times over the course of an assembly, exposing them to the same levies more than once. The sweeping tariffs could drive up car prices by as much as $12,000 for some models, according to a report from the AEG, a Michigan-based economic consultancy. $12,000 an increase in car prices. We also have gasoline. Fuel prices could quickly reflect the new tariffs, according to Dehan of Gas Buddy. They say oil, natural gas, and electricity imported from Canada will be subject to a 10% levy that could lead to a higher price almost immediately for U.S. motorists. They say, quote, some U.S. regions will see price impacts rather quickly, while others will see a delay of 1 to 3 weeks. So some of this stuff, it's going to basically happen overnight. Some of this is going to take a couple of months to develop. But either way, prices are going up for basically all core necessities that you need to purchase here in the U.S. Now, of course, these countries are not just going to, lay back and do nothing about this. So just as one example in terms of the retaliation that you could expect from Mexico, Canada, China, etc. Here we have Doug Ford. I think he's like a premier in Ontario. Don't know if that's the actual accurate term for it, premier. I'm just going to go with that. But here he says he's going to do everything, including cutting off energy to the U.S.
If they want to try to annihilate Ontario, I will do everything, including cut off their energy, with a smile on my face. If they want to...
So David Dole expands on this here. He says no other party leader would have delivered this line, while Ford is the wrong premier, so I did have that right, for a variety of clear reasons. And he cites healthcare, wages, housing, etc. And this guy's a conservative. Other parties could learn from how he communicates and why it connects with people. So already getting some potential retaliation on the horizon here. We also have this here from friend of the show, Kyle Kalinske, who says, what you need to understand about Elon is he's both a giant idiot and a giant liar. And what he's talking about here is this tweet from Trump, where on the subject of tariffs, he's trying to make the argument that, like, this is not a fair relationship that we have with Canada because Canada doesn't allow American banks to do business in Canada, but their banks flood the American market. Oh, that seems fair to me, doesn't it? Obviously being sarcastic. Elon Musk then responds to that by saying, it's a valid point, the rules are asymmetric. Now, there's just one problem with this, which is that it's not true. U.S. banks do business in Canada to a pretty significant scale. So, I mean, this is part of the problem with Elon and Trump, and even, like, from my perspective in trying to cover this shit, is you literally cannot take anything that these guys say at face value. Right? Remember when we were covering the supposed savings that Doge came out with, and the headline is, oh, we just saved $55 billion, and they put out this sheet explaining how they did it. And it's like, okay, you could take that at face value and just trust them. But then if you look a little bit more into the numbers, it's like, okay, you made up this number over here is wrong, this number has an extra 3 zeros added on to the end of it, and oh, what do you know, you didn't save $55 billion, you actually saved closer to like $8 billion. So it's just been lie after lie after lie, and warping reality into what they want it to be, and then trying to fight against ghosts that don't really exist, right? I mean, this is the whole conversation around tackling waste, fraud, and abuse. It's like, there's plenty of waste, fraud, and abuse that you could be going after in, like, the Pentagon, for example, or programs like Medicaid Advantage, or, other areas within even programs like Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid, where private for-profit corporations are taking advantage of these programs and overcharging them and actually committing real fraud. And you could bring legal cases against those private corporations for doing that. But that's not what they're actually going after. they're going after the benefit side of it, right? Elon's claim, for example, on Social Security is that there are millions and millions of Americans who are fraudulently accepting Social Security checks. So there's plenty of corruption. There's plenty of waste. There's plenty of fraud. There's plenty of abuse within the U.S. government, right? Again, I would start with the Pentagon as issue number one if I wanted to address that. But they're not going after the real waste, fraud, and abuse. They're just going after programs that are supposed to be benefiting average working class Americans, while at the same time getting rid of all sorts of accountability mechanisms and regulations and rules for the wealthy, for the powerful in this country, right? Now, we continue with another good take here, I think, from Jake, Economic Pick, I guess is his name. And I just thought this was a good take. I saw Kyle share it. So he says, if I wanted to crash the economy, I think I'd put on indiscriminate tariffs, push cheap labor out of our country, slash public jobs, cut public spending, promote an alternative to the dollar, and incentivize every global ally to look to partner with China. And that's basically the Trump policy so far. Now, we also have a take here from Ben Norton, where he says Trump's economic plan is trickle-down Reaganism 2.0. They want to crush demand and reduce worker purchasing power by gutting social spending. They'll cut taxes on the rich and deregulate corporate oligopolies. Then they'll print money with quantitative easing to reinflate asset prices for elites. So he's right. This is the basic game plan here. You're basically going to have trickle-down economics 2.0. Obviously, trickle-down economics never worked, will never work, has never worked in this country. But this is the plan. We're going to slash taxes for the wealthy. We're going to deregulate. We're going to privatize in an effort to do the bidding of Trump's donors and his rich, wealthy buddies. And then at the same time, we're going to basically crush workers. We are going to get rid of the NLRB. We're going to get rid of the CFPB. We're going to get rid of any sort of protections for average working class people from scam and fraud and abuse and from, illegal union busting practices from corporations. We're going to gut social programs like Social Security, Medicaid, and, food stamps and other things like that. And basically it's class warfare. I mean, that's the easiest way to put it. This is a massive wealth transfer from the poor to the rich that we are currently witnessing right now. And Trump's crypto plan that he put forward for the crypto reserve that I covered yesterday is a perfect example of that. It's like there is no argument that this is in the best interest of average working class American taxpayers. Like this is literally, they are stealing money from U.S. taxpayers to ship it off into crypto markets to enrich wealthy billionaire crypto owners, right? That's literally all that is. They are looting the treasury and rubbing your face in it, and then pretending as if he represents the average working man. I mean, it's a joke. It's a complete and utter joke. Now, to put a fine point on that, in terms of just the outright brazen corruption of the Trump administration and the gutting of any sort of accountability measures for the wealthy and powerful and the elite in this country, here we have the U.S. Treasury Department saying that it will not enforce an anti-money laundering law that requires millions of business entities to disclose the identities of their real owners. So we're getting rid of enforcement of anti-money laundering laws to protect corporate entities. We also have this. After mass firings, the IRS is poised to close audits of wealthy taxpayers. IRS agents say that current audits of rich people and corporations could be closed down prematurely. The Treasury Department estimates that the 1%, top 1% in this country, account for $163 billion in unpaid taxes each year. So, I mean, Elon, if you want to find a little bit of, savings here, you could start by going after wealthy, rich tax cheats, kind of like yourself, right? So, two examples there. One final one. Trump's EPA is advancing a proposal to block states from warning consumers about toxic chemicals in their food, according to documents reviewed by The Lever. One chemical that could be banned from labels was called poison by Trump's HHS secretary, obviously RFK Jr. Now, that's also like an amazing part of the Trump administration. And granted, we're early on. Maybe RFK is going to, bring us healthy American food one day. But RFK Jr. constantly talks about this kind of shit, about how there's poison in the American food supply. And to some extent, he's kind of right about that. Like, that is something that we should address. Massive corporations who are, essentially poisoning us with chemicals that are banned in every other major developed country on the face of the planet. But there's a contradiction, because Trump and like his ag secretary and all of these other positions that he is staffing his government with, they all work for the companies, or they're associated with the companies and the industries that are doing the poisoning. So Trump's entire agenda stands opposed to doing some of the things that somebody like RFK actually wants to do on this front. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, if RFK just sort of like falls in line with objectively evil and bad shit like this. I mean, you're proposing to block states from warning consumers about toxic chemicals. You don't want consumers to know about toxic chemicals in their food. I mean, again, this is another perfect example. What possible explanation could you have from this, other than Trump is doing the bidding of wealthy corporations in this country at the expense of everybody else? That is the only explanation. Now, finishing off here, in terms of the potential political impact of this economic fallout that we're seeing right now, here from Harry Enton over on CNN, he says Trump's numbers right now are historically awful.
We're going to look at presidents at this point in their presidency, right? And the word here that I would use to describe Trump is awful. In fact, the only person who does worse than Trump does right now with a +1 net approval rating is himself back in 2017 when he was at -8. So he's doing better than he was.
I was going to say, you could put it another way. He's making gains.
He's making gains, but he's doing worse than everybody else. The average president at this point, get this, +27 points on their net approval rating. Donald Trump is doing historically awful. The only person he beats is, again, himself from term number 1.
How about on the issue that, one, he says he was most elected to?
So in terms of his approval rating, right? And keep in mind, Trump is about to do his first joint address to Congress tonight. So we're going to have to cover that tomorrow, obviously, and see what he talks about. But in terms of his approval rating so far, contrary to the narrative from Republicans that they have this massive sweeping mandate and the entirety of the American people are behind them and Trump's agenda right now, him, both in 2017 and 2025, are the two lowest approval ratings at this point in their term in American history. The average for American presidents this early is +27. Trump back in his first term was -8, and now he's only +1. So, I mean, the numbers are already trending in the downward direction for Trump, and we've barely even gotten started here, guys. I mean, think about how much worse this is going to get when the prices start to rise more, which is inevitably going to happen now. And I'll finish off with this because this is just amazing. We've been covering some of the Republican town halls across the country where they are just getting absolutely berated by their own constituents who are furious that they're just going along with the wealthiest man in human history hijacking the federal government, that they're mass firing a bunch of workers, many of whom are veterans, for example. They've been getting a lot of pushback to other things like the Social Security potential cuts that are on the horizon, etc. And amidst all of this blowback and pushback, they're basically just throwing in the towel. And now you have the NRCC chief who is telling House Republicans, just don't do town halls anymore. It's a great democracy, right? These kinds of town halls should be absolutely mandatory for every single elected official. You should have to go and face the music. You should have to go and face your own constituents and explain to them why you're doing what you're doing. If they're going to scream at you, if they're going to yell at you, if they're going to humiliate you, then so be it. Maybe that should, apply a little bit of pressure on you to change what you're doing. But instead, they're basically just going to cower in fear, I guess. And that's the strategy. So I'll leave you guys off with that. Man, I mean, this has been an absolute blitz over the last couple of months since Trump took office. I mean, I thought that it would be somewhat chaotic. I don't think anybody could have predicted that this much would happen this quickly. But here we are. We're potentially on the verge of an economic crash. And we're only 2 and a bit months into Trump's administration.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying